I think when you look at the math, it's like I'm doing all these difficult hours at weird times, and realistically, a good outcome for me this year, just to put a number on it, just a ballpark number, I'd make about $30,000. I'm going to say this: I don't think there's a Westerner on Earth getting paid a good full-time wage to play Overwatch this year. Not one person. My speculation is that Blizzard reduced the prize pool for EWC. I don't think Blizzard cares about esports at all. Is the job something that's enjoyable, right, over the next 4 months? Well, no. I really think I already regret not quitting 6 months ago.
I'm here with Gunba, current still coach of ENCE, but has announced his retirement. So we're here to talk about that and get some more nuance of the reasons that you've already given on Twitter in short, but expand a little bit on the issues that you see and just the potential that you see elsewhere in your career going forward as a professional in a serious industry, I suppose one has to say at this point. So can you explain a little bit about your thoughts, why you decided now that this would be the move? Because presumably a lot of the variables that you accounted for were already in your calculation when you decided to keep going in the OWCS. So what changed? What led to this decision?
Yeah, there's a lot of variables there. One is that there were a lot of unknowns. A lot of people decided at the very start of this year to just retire outright, and we don't really think about them as much because they never gave the product a chance. They kind of just stopped competing after Overwatch. Many of them didn't announce some kind of retirement or something like that, so a lot of people just kind of faded into the background. I guess I'm more notable because I'm someone that tried OWCS and then decided I didn't like it, It's not like it was just something natural for me. It's like I wanted to keep competing, but I decided against it. So I do think that raises a red flag for people when they think about the product, and does raise a bunch of questions. I think there's two sides to it. One is that there's new information, and the other is that I now have a very real sense of what competing in OWS is going to be like, and what competing in FaCe is going to be like, and the time zones, and just the overall level of competition, and all of these things. So to kind of tackle those two issues, I guess, starting with the things that I couldn't calculate because I didn't really have a feeling for them. I live in Australia, Western Australia to be specific. It means that when I do practice for European teams, I'm working from midnight to 8 a.m. in the morning, which is incredible. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's tiring. I don't get to see my family at all. I don't get to have any kind of social life or anything. It takes up basically my whole life, which I think is a problem when you look at an esport like Overwatch now, that I think is more of a hobby esport when you look at the financials. So there's that issue. It's a huge amount of work at a really weird time zone. And then you kind of look at the things that have changed in the prediction, right? In terms of the way FaceIt's going as a product, the Esports World Cup amount has been reduced by about it's basically 1/3 of the original amount. And kind of some of the reasons for why that may have happened, I think, which we should probably get into. But I think when you look at the math, it's so the work is much harder than I anticipated, and much less rewarding financially. Why would I bother? I think when you look at the math, it's I'm doing all these difficult hours at weird times, and realistically, a good outcome for me this year, just to put a number on it, just a ballpark number, I'd make about $30,000 over the whole year, right? Which is a hobby. It's a very good hobby if you make that amount of money on a side project essentially. But with the time zones, it's not a side project, and directly interferes with my ability to have a normal job, which I think you would need to have to sustain something like this. That might not be the case for everybody. Some people might have some money from their family, or maybe they're rich independently, or whatever the case may be. I'm not. I grew up really poor. The money I do have, I made through Overwatch, and I'm 31 years old. I need to continue earning, I think, to have a sustainable life. So I don't have that choice. So I need to make a realistic choice, I think, and looking at the variables, I think this is that choice.
For sure. Then let's discuss these variables, because I think when initially the news sort of started ramping out that what the Esports World Cup prize pool might be, I remember I released a Twitter thread. A lot of the responses were like, "Oh yeah, doing life decisions based on rumors." Well, like what kind of information did you have, or what did you speculate on, and where did you think the prize pool overall in the year was going to be for the different events?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of variables there as well. Right? Every single one of these decisions all culminate in me retiring, but there's so many things to think about. It's hard to even like think about them all at once, you know. I guess just to like talk about Faceit and Blizzard and that whole side of things and EWC all at once. You know, I think there's a bunch of red flags there because I think one of the other questions people might ask is like, well, maybe why don't you think Overwatch will get better, right? And I don't. I don't think it'll get better. And I think this is another reason why I'm retiring, right? I don't have any optimism for the future, right? Not that I ever had optimism for Overwatch League. I think we all knew that that was headed nowhere, but you can kind of stomach that lack of optimism with a paycheck that comes in every month, which I don't have. You know, I get $500 a month, right? Yeah, from the org anyway. And you know, the prize money, I still haven't been paid for flash ops or for season 1, stage 1, right? So, but, you know, banking on prize money is a bit suspicious, obviously, but not sure that'll get better with Saudi prize money, to be honest, judging from what I've heard. But I think some of the players on TM that aren't Saudi haven't even been paid consistently. So, you know, not really a believer in the oil money, so to speak. But just to kind of talk about Faceit and Blizzard, you know, I think there's a bunch of variables there that don't make sense. You know, the rumors that we heard were $3 million, roughly, for the Overwatch prize pool, right? Or maybe that's all inclusive. Maybe it's not. You know, I don't know. And then some amount of money for majors and playoffs and this kind of thing. It's like the more I look at those numbers now that it's 1 million, you know, I suspect a few things. I suspect that, and this is going to sound a bit doomer, and this is speculation, but I'm making life decisions based on necessary speculation. You know, I think you have to predict things to make life choices when it comes to this kind of thing. I'm not from the future, so my speculation is that Blizzard reduced the prize pool for EWC. Because that would explain why there was a rumor that, you know, I've heard rumors that this is actually true. Like, I thought about this when I saw the numbers, because I realized, like, why is StarCraft the same as Overwatch, you know? That doesn't make any sense. And there's clearly interference from developers in the EWC prize pools, because League of Legends is $1 million, which doesn't make sense, of course. The interest in that esport is massive. And then you have, like, random outliers, like I think Rocket League's 250,000 for no reason. So obviously, like, developers have the ability to influence the prize pools. I think that's self-evident, just based on the numbers. And I think Blizzard doesn't really want to associate with the EWC. They just want to get like Faceit on board for running the tournaments, you know. So they've like begrudgingly accepted EWC and like capped the prize pool. I think anyway. That's my speculation. So maybe that's why the prize pool changed. But yeah, like when most of our money was coming from that alleged $3 million prize pool, and I signed a contract heavily based on prize money, that creates a huge conflict for me because now my earning potential, if we go like 4th at EWC, is about $30,000 over the whole year. And 4th at EWC is optimistic considering there's already 2 Korean super teams and FTG is making changes to become a super team. It's going to be difficult to justify believing that we can beat these teams, realistically, given how weak our scene is too, you know? So from my perspective, I think Faceit is getting screwed by Blizzard. I think the whole premise of Faceit is a failure as well. I don't think people are ever going to sign up to play Overwatch pugs. I don't think people are going to pay money to enter open division style tournaments. You know, I think we've seen that already. I get a message on Twitter from some Faceit employee every 3 days saying, "Have you signed up for Faceit?" Like, yeah, I'm qualified to the master event. I'm definitely, you know, playing Faceit, right? Like, what do you mean? Like, I think they're super desperate. So I think things aren't working out for Faceit, and I think Blizzard doesn't give a fuck. You know, I don't think Blizzard cares about esports at all. We've seen that BlizzCon's been cancelled as well, so no optimism for any of those things. You know, we can dive into like specifics on any of these topics if you want, but yeah, you can see that the yearly earning potential has gone from like what we perceive to be like $3 million plus whatever Blizzard had in terms of the majors, to $1 million basically plus that amount. And it's like, okay, so what is the amount that Blizzard have in stock for the major or the finals? I mean, it's a Hanzo crowdfund, and judging by the way that they've handled crowdfunding before, they're going to use a crowdfunding up to a certain amount. So like they'll guarantee some amount. They'll give 25% of the Hanzo skin money, and then you'll have to repay that money that they fronted, if that makes sense. So like Blizzard might promise $250,000, and then crowdfund up to $250,000, and then that'll pay off their prize money allocation, for example. This is how Blizzard's done it in the past. And this leads me to believe that the number for crowdfunding will be quite low. Plus the fact that it's a Hanzo skin, I think is not something to be optimistic about. So I've thought about this a lot. Sorry to ramble, but There's a lot of variables there for sure. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no. Let's unpack some of those. I suppose like the one thing that I guess we should clarify based on like maybe have you expound a little bit on the reasons as to why you believe that the prize pool was capped was like you do not have to, of course, disclose your sources where you heard those numbers from, but was it more than just like back chatter between like players, or like were there actual officials involved in informing your opinion on that 3 million number?
I heard a rumor about this from someone that also told me that the prize pool would be what it was before it was, if that makes sense. So I sort of trust the source in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, I mean, the reason I think that mostly isn't even that source. It's just the fact that if you look at the numbers, it's obvious there is developer interference in the prize amounts, right? Rocket League being at $250,000 is really unusual when you look at those prize listings, right? Why is that esport the only one at that number? You know, and it's a really big esport too. So it's obvious that developers have influence over these events to allow these events to use their game. And I think the motive for Blizzard's pretty simple. I think the concern is that they don't want the biggest Overwatch tournament ever to be in Saudi Arabia, right? Like I think that's a huge concern for them, especially when I think, you know, as Chris said on stream at some point, you know, the way they announce Blizzard to the world at BlizzCon is their most diverse game, Overwatch. Like Overwatch is a game that promotes, you know, diversity, inclusion, you know, LGBT issues, for example. So having their premier event over the whole esports history be in Saudi Arabia is obviously a huge conflict for them. So I can see their motives, you know. But yeah, I do believe that's what happened. I could be wrong about that, you know. It doesn't really matter what the reason is at the end of the day. You know, I'm just trying to find reasons to rag on Blizzard, but a $1 million prize pool for the event that was supposed to get every organization into Overwatch esports is a huge concern, right? And it's a huge concern for a number of reasons. Because if that event doesn't pay off, you have a bunch of problems arise instantly, right? Like, if that event doesn't exist or doesn't have the same prestige or like money associated with it, that money has to come from somewhere else for competitors. But it doesn't, because there are no sponsors for Overwatch. Because you can't, who's sponsoring a Saudi Arabian event being the marquee event for the no one, like obviously. So, and then other than that, like how many games are you playing that are streamed as a team each year? If you're a top team, you play like three games each stage, right? Like, you know, I don't think the return is there for organizations. I think Overwatch itself has restrictive sponsorship rights as well. They restrict any kind of like gambling or crypto, and then there's also like other worries about, you know, peripheral sponsors and stuff like that. So I think the whole scene looks like shit to teams, to orgs. And I think that was true when the prize pool was alleged to be $3 million, you know? Now it's a lot less. So I can't imagine how this game looks to orgs. And then you have issues with a lot of teams just not making the club program, right? Like most teams will not make it into the esports club program, which is another $20 million that's going into the event that they won't have access to. So yeah, just a bunch of reasons for orgs not to get involved or spend money, and that means the salaries are really low. So, you know, no sponsorship opportunities, and then the prize pool's low. It's like, okay, now what? What is there? What's left here, you know? Yeah, I think a lot of people are saying stuff like, well, of course, why would you expect Overwatch to be a paying job? It's like, I don't think that was the expectation. I think if you're at the very top, it would appear that way, and you would hope it would appear that way, but actually, even at the very top, I think that's the case. That it's not a self-sustaining paying job, you know. I'm going to say this. I don't think there's a Westerner on Earth getting paid a good full-time wage to play Overwatch this year. Not one person. I'm pretty familiar with like everyone's salaries and their like prize money allocations. I think the top Westerner this year might earn about $70,000 US. To be honest, like the highest earning Westerner in the entire world will earn that amount of money, you know. And most people earn much less than that. So, yeah, not a great situation.
For sure. Now, let's also talk about the crowdfunding initiative for Dallas and Stockholm. Now, the one thing that I noticed, and I think you asked about this in DMs, like there is no official number in terms of a baseline for the crowdfunding, right? So had that number been there, like what do you expect it to be, and like what where should it be? And then even if there's no baseline, what do you expect the crowdfunding effort to be from the community the end.
Yeah, so I actually thought about this as well. My thinking is based on the World Cup spending. Now, do you know if for the World Cup, how did Blizzard structure that prize money arrangement with crowdfunding for the World Cup stuff? Did they have a base amount that then had to be raised above, or did they guarantee some amount and then raise on top of that? I'm not too familiar with that system. Are you familiar with it?
I don't know either. Like in my mind, it was 500K, and then maybe I'm wrong, but it ended up being 516, I think. And presumably the total revenue of that is 4x. So I don't think they've announced the specifics on how much of the revenue will go towards the prize pool either, and whether or not that will be different from the Overwatch World Cup. So I don't know. No,
Did they guarantee some amount?
I don't remember. Would have to look that up.
Okay. In any case, no matter how you slice it, we can probably say that around $500,000 was raised for the World Cup, right? And this is an event that has ties to nationalism, obviously, people being like patriotic about their country and supporting their country. It has support, it has ties to the World Cup being the biggest event Overwatch has every year, right? It's at BlizzCon, it has all of these things going for it, right? Like it's such a perfect event for a crowdfunding effort. Getting the amount of the amount of World Cup icons I've seen in game and Overwatch is crazy. A bunch of people bought this. What do you think the ratio? Like how many people are going to buy a Hanzo skin for the crowdfunding effort for Dallas? I don't think it's going to be $500,000. I think given the same sort of math in terms of 25% goes to the crowdfunding effort, maybe that number is like 100,000 or 200,000. Which just isn't enough, right? I mean, it's just not enough to. Again, I'm assuming things. Who knows? I have to kind of assume things to make decisions, but the math doesn't look good, right? The math looks like the number I kind of came up with, to be honest, to justify like where I thought my earnings would be this year was about $1.8 million over the whole year. Face it, and Blizzard events included. It might be slightly more or less, I don't know, but that's basically just the playoffs fund for Overwatch League, right? It's like if you had the Overwatch League and you got the only event in the whole year was the grand final, and there was no salaries. That's basically my life, So, it doesn't make a lot of financial sense, I think.
Sure. Now the timing of that retirement is interesting because presumably, I mean, the in terms of the income spike, that's about to happen, right? With Dallas, and then the Esports World Cup. I think it has been announced to run at the latest till like late August, whenever the Overwatch competition is going to be. So why not stick around for that and then quit after?
Yeah, I mean, not to get into like more boring math, but I did look at the numbers on that based on like the assumptions of the prize pool, and like based on my team's like expected placement plus like the range, plus like the 12% prize allocation I get, plus like the $500 a month that I get, right? And just any job I accept will give me more money. Essentially, is the reason, right? I mean, that's what, like a 4-month period, and I'll be lucky to make $20,000. I'll probably make less. That's it. It's just simple math. I don't think it makes sense to continue. I think it would have made sense to continue if the Esports World Cup was the amount that we had suspected. And I think that is ultimately the catalyst for me retiring. Is basically the moment I saw that prize money was 1 million, I started to really think about it. I was like, wow, this is pointless. Maybe there's like a sunk cost fallacy I could have fallen for there, where oh well, I've already gone a few months into this. Why wouldn't I go a few more, kind of thing? But I don't think that makes sense. I'm only getting older, and I have to get back into like software development or like whatever I end up doing after this. So now seems like the right time. I guess that's all. And that's just like on top of that, it's like you have to consider the happiness of the job itself. It's like, is the job something that's enjoyable, right? Over the next like 4 months? Well, no. I wake up at midnight and we scrim London, and then we scrim Toronto every day. Like literally every single day. It's the exact same sequence of events against the same teams, right? It's really boring. It's so boring. The level of play is like really shit. The talent level of the teams is lower than Overwatch League. It's just a negative experience, It's like there's nothing to do in terms of, you know, like your day to day. It's so repetitive. And then the money's not good. So what's the reason to do that? I don't really have aspirations in terms of like winning World Cup or something, you know? That's not going to happen with a zero Korean team. Let's be honest. I think Koreans are going to win EWC. They're going to win Dallas as well. That's my prediction. So if winning's not possible and like every day is monotony, it's like, well, I guess that made the decision easier.
Right. I guess. Do you see, just because of the sort of scrim bubble that is enforced by King, that there's just no vector of improvement for Western teams because they cannot scrim Korean teams?
I think the scrim bubble is not that bad in terms of the fact that Europe and NA can scrim each other for the most part. I just think Westerners are worse at the game.
Right.
That's it. They're just less talented, right? Like I worked with the Mayhem players last year, and I work with Western players now, and like not to insult them, I think we have some great Western players. You know, we have like Kevster, for example, but you just see them make mistakes that you know you can't fix all the time. And it's so boring to watch it happen because it's like, what are you supposed to do? You know, it's exhausting. And the other team's just as bad, right? The teams you're scrimming are just as bad. Which is going to make it sort of an arms race, the same way it was in Overwatch League, where it's like, how many Koreans can you import? And that's like maybe the segue here. I think that's like another really good discussion. It's like I hinted at in my calculations for like how much money I would make this year, and there's no situation where it's good. Don't get me wrong, but like I hinted at like, you know, the average performance of my team, for example. It's like, you know, if you look at our org and our team, in terms of spending, we're already like 8th or 9th, you know, in the world, right? Like you have a lot of teams who are going to spend way more money to import players, house players, you know, go above and beyond to win. And maybe they're stupid for doing so. Like the return on investment is not there for these teams, you know, but they're doing it anyway, and we're not. So, you have teams like, you know, Toronto, M80 in NA, you have SSG, TM in Europe, you have, you know, Falcons, WAC, the new FTG in Korea, right? That's already 7 teams I've just listed that are going to spend more than us to import players. So yeah, I really just think like our potential for performance over the whole year is also in doubt, if that makes sense. You know, I think it's unrealistic to make bets that I'm going to somehow carry a team to top 4, even though I think that's possible. Even though I think I could do it, and like, given the right meta and, you know, things going our way, it's possible. It's like you can't bet your life on overperforming, right? Doesn't make any sense. So I think when you start to look at the prize return on a team that's like 6th through 8th, it's really low. It's like 3% of the prize pool, probably, right? You know, we're talking like $5,000 if I go to Saudi Arabia and we get a placement in that range. You know, not great. You know, not really worth it. So I think if you're like one of these like Koreans on like, you know, Falcons or WAC who are getting paid like a lot of money, and you have like a really good chance to get, you know, first or second in like every event. So the salary is good and the pricing is good. And the time zones and like, you know, the scrim quality is high. It's like a completely different universe for those guys, I think, you know. I think it makes a lot of sense. But for Westerners, I think this esport's bricked. Like, I think it's a hobby esport, and we'll probably never win anything. And I think that's really sad.
Yeah, for sure. I think what I wanted to also establish is like a baseline of what you expect to, I guess, make, because we're talking very mathematically, and I want to get back away from that in a second. But like, what did you study? What kind of credentials do you have, and what do you ideally expect to make in that job comparison?
Yeah, I have a postgraduate data science degree from like a really, really good university. I have like a bachelor's in computer science, so I was a software developer before I quit, you know. Getting back into that stuff is non-trivial, obviously, but very, very possible. And like, even if I accepted like a junior level job, I'd probably make 3 or 4 times as much money as I'm going to make this year in Overwatch, right? So I think in that sense, it's a no-brainer. You know, I think the ballpark earning for Overwatch this year is probably like 20 grand, you know, for me. Which is just not a lot of money for the kind of investment this job requires, you know. 8 to 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, through the night, right? Like that's a crazy job schedule, I think, to have, you know. So yeah, I think the math on that side of things is really simple. You'd have to be like yeah, I'd have to be really into the job and like really into Overwatch to get that done, I think.
Was the calculation more worth it doing Overwatch League? Because presumably, I mean, you could have been further along in that other career, and like the calculation there is probably already something that one has to question, right?
Yeah, so that's the thing, becoming an esports coach and quitting my job as a developer to become a pro player in Taiwan at the very start was never a thing about money, That was never really the important detail for me, but um, there was a lot of money though, like would I have made more money if I just kept developing and doing like, uh, that or data science or whatever? Yeah, of course, right? But it struck a good balance where I was like doing something really cool with my life. I was getting to travel, I was competing, I was working in video games, like, a lot of things like that I wanted to do since I was young kind of thing. And I got to do all those things, if that makes sense, and earn a lot of money, have like a lot of savings and stuff and doing well, Even last year, I can just like be completely honest. I made something like $150,000, which is, I mean, for a Western coach, pretty good, Um, but I think it's also time to be realistic and realize like when that's over, and not, hold on to it desperately, if that makes sense. Which I think a lot of people are going to do, unfortunately. I always see like I'm sure you're familiar with this. There are a lot of people in like tier 2 Overwatch that are never going to make it. Like you just know that they're wasting their lives. Like it's like really sad to see that shit. And now it's like that's everyone. That's all of us. That's what everyone's doing at this point, essentially. Because there's just no money in what we're doing. So it has to be something that you do because you love it and you don't need the money, right? And I do need the money. I'm not old enough to retire yet, so obviously, happy for the people that can continue, but yeah, it has to be something you love doing. I think even more so than when Overwatch League was around.
Yeah, for sure. So this is definitely like we're talking a lot of numbers, but there's also, of course, something about the emotional aspect here that you value against your time and your effort here. So is a healthy part of the equation also falling out of love with the practice of it all?
Yeah, and there are reasons for that. I think, as I said, with like the quality of the play is much worse. Sorry, alarm. It feels bad to go from like a really high level of play with like really high stakes to like a really low level of play with no stakes. So definitely falling out of love with that, I think, and just like realizing that I'm never going to see a team play at the level that Mayhem played at is definitely sad, because that means I'm watching people make mistakes every day that I've already fixed before, and that sucks. That's really draining. Like, it's so boring. But I also think the game itself is degraded a lot in quality. I think the developers don't know what they're doing, and ever since the recent, the new age of Overwatch 2 developers have taken over, like the more they've changed the game, the worse they've made it. And that continues to happen now, I think the meta we're playing right now is a great example of that. It's super boring to watch. Like, it's really, really one note. Really low complexity. Just, I think one of the things that maybe Overwatch League caused is that the developers had some sense of developing for pro play. Not like a strong sense, but they were held accountable to make sure that, little things got changed and the pros had some input, and yeah, that was nice. Now it feels like there's none, obviously, because there isn't any. Why would there be? The esport is an appendage that Blizzard wants to cut off, essentially. So, I think the Blizzard's ongoing disdain for professional Overwatch has been a huge part of that as well. I think the game's gotten worse and worse. And then there's other issues too. I think we're not competing in the same format that we were last year, which was like pretty good, to be honest. Overwatch League had a really good format for players and teams. Maybe even for viewers too, I don't know, but there was a lot of consistency to it. You played like a few matches each week, and that sort of culminated, and your team kind of developed over time. Now you see a lot of situations that don't make a lot of sense, The way Timeless got eliminated, like, that woke me up a bit to realize that Timeless had like a really good year, and then they lost, like, as someone who flamed Timeless, I was like, I don't want to hate on those guys. They're a good team, They deserve to go to Dallas, I think, in my opinion, like based on their level, But they're not going to Dallas because they lost 2 matches in a row because the Swiss stage fucked up their seeding and they had to play like a really hard group,
Wait,
That's kind of terrifying.
real quick.
What's up?
Which of the top 3 NA teams would you take out for Timeless?
Well, I think there's a chance they would go over like Luminosity. Realistically, I think if you played that match again, you might get a different result on a different day,
Right.
And they have historically beaten M80 multiple times as well, right? But we don't get to see that matchup play out when it matters because of the Swiss seeding, right? It happened in groups instead, which doesn't make any sense, right? Like, Timeless were presented with a challenge that they shouldn't have been presented with at the wrong stage of the tournament, which is unfair, I think,
Citrus
And also
Nation
it takes
as a
away from the...
challenge?
What's wrong?
Citrus Nation as a challenge? Is that the bar?
Yeah, they obviously dropped the ball. There's no doubt about it. But
Mm.
I mean, again, like the Swiss seeding fucked up the groups undeniably, right? Like the
Right.
usual punishment for fucking up in groups would be that you go like second seed, you're playing from like the bottom 4 out of the top 8. But instead they mess up one match and then they play a close match against Luminosity and they're out of the groups. And then if you look at those groups, there's another group somewhere where teams that weren't very good made it through because the Swiss seeding was bad, This is people's livelihoods, they've committed to this, and like it's a small detail, but it's unfair. You know it is, and it's like the fact that you can lose 2 matches after coming second in the previous event and you're just out of the whole event is wild to me. Like that's crazy. That's like a 6-month period of their lives that goes down the drain because of arbitrary Swiss seeding, right? Not saying that they didn't fuck up. They did, right? Of course they did. But yeah, that's crazy. Like that's really ridiculous. Overwatch League never had that problem, right? Overwatch League had many chances, and same with the Korean format. We've seen that as well. Like the amount of last chance qualifiers they get. I think in the first event, how many teams got eliminated in the first event? One, like literally
so.
one team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you get a lot of chances over a long period of time. It's more stable. So I think the format's also a huge issue, and in that, yeah, a bunch of reasons really, but yeah, definitely some element there of falling in love with Overwatch. I think for sure.
Right.
I don't like playing the game, so.
I wanted to throw some balls of copium at you and see how you play with them. One of them would have been, of course, the higher OWCS prize pool, which we don't know too much about, and like maybe the Hanzo skin overperforms. Even then, like, what would be like a top 10% expectation for you, like in terms of like where that might land?
The prize pool specifically?
Yes, for Dallas.
Top 10%? 300,000. That would be exceptional, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's, of course, like in comparison, you're judging that against the Overwatch World Cup, that presumably just has much more income potential. Okay, fair. What about the Chinese inclusion into something like Overwatch Championship Series? And then there's a potential of them having third-party tournament organizers. Maybe they get something going sooner rather than later. Is that a vector of improvement for the scene?
For the scene, yes. Right? But most of that money would go to China. I'm not sure China's going to host international tournaments. Maybe I don't know something, but that doesn't seem like something that's likely, or at least sustainable. I think if they did, maybe it would make more sense for them to host those full APAC teams where the flights are lower cost and maybe they can play online or whatever, But given the overall viewership of our esport, I'm not sure that benefits me at least anyway, We're looking at 40,000 viewers or something for OWCS. I mean, we're not where we'd like to be as an esport that should be self-sustaining mostly, so.
Sure. And then, I mean, for next year, you never know. You came back before, right? What if the announcement, and they got it out of the gate a little bit earlier, not as, I mean, technically it's still not publicly announced, an increase in the Esports World Cup prize pool for Overwatch?
Yeah, I still don't think it would be enough. I'm pretty committed to my decision. Like, it's not one thing, It's a bunch of different things. Yeah, it's just like the money's not there, but also I don't really enjoy the job anymore, so it's not simple. I think it's more that the Esports World Cup prize pool getting announced kind of made me think about retiring more, if that makes sense, rather than it individually being the reason. I think there's a bunch of reasons. I think a big one is like a lack of optimism in the future of the game and the esport itself. I've said this publicly many times. I think the OWCS product is garbage, right? I think Overwatch League product is garbage, and they copy and pasted that onto OWCS, right? I think the casting talent is mostly garbage. I think the way they've set up the broadcasting and the schedule for the games is pretty bad. I don't really have a lot of good things to say about the product, and I think Facet's also made like a huge mistake trying to run like Overwatch pugs, and as I said, trying to sell, like make people buy access into these tournaments. I think this is a crap model for Overwatch. So I just have like no optimism for the game at all, basically, at this point, which I think is warranted, right? I think most people probably feel that way, to be honest. But I'm not sure I see the avenues for improvement here, to be honest.
what would you have liked to have seen with OWCS and the format change? Like, what kind of changes do you think you could have been more confident in?
I think the Korean side of Overwatch is doing a good job, right? Like, I think first of all, I think their format with like the consistent weekly matches, and obviously they can do LAN because it's Korea, so they're a bit closer to each other and they can all travel down to the same arena or whatever. That can't be copied, obviously, but the format and some of the like the map picking system and all that stuff is really good. So I think there's like definitely more work there for FACEIT to do on like the tournament structure. Or I'm not sure who's responsible for the tournament structure. It could be Overwatch. It could be Blizzard, obviously. But I think that kind of like format type stuff is also really relevant. I would have liked to see them get more casters in and like try and improve the product that way, change up who's casting. Not sure what else. The scheduling's obviously a bit sus. We don't really get streamed very often, which I think is not helping the esport, obviously. So yeah, a bunch of issues like that. Yeah, I'd really like for there to be accountability for the product itself. I'd like to know who is running the product. Like, who is running OWCS? Like, who is that person? Who's the person that speaks to like why they do certain things, or like at who I can like direct my complaints? Who is that person? I just get the sense that with Blizzard, they either don't give a fuck or don't have the motivation to like challenge things and try things and take risks. I think that's kind of what Overwatch needs as an esport. And I think they're playing it incredibly safe, and they've been playing it incredibly safe for years, and it's led nowhere. So I guess that's where the lack of optimism comes from. I'm not sure like that's something that can be easily fixed. I think it's cultural. But yeah, I think they're going to happily do nothing as the esport falls underground.
For sure. Do you have an explanation why it's also not doing that great in terms of viewership in Korea? If like at least from the format side they're doing better?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for why those numbers are so bad. I've looked at that as well. I think, to be honest, it's surprising. Like, I think they have like 3,000 viewers. I wouldn't be surprised if most of their viewers are Japanese. For some reason, Japanese Overwatch is popping off. I can't really answer that. It might have to do with the platforms they're using, because I don't think Koreans can use Twitch. That might be a big issue, to be honest. The platform they're using, it's like chzzk.com or whatever it is. I've never heard of it in my life. So maybe it's just like something like that with the licensing, or maybe they're not promoting it. Yeah. I'm really not sure what the reason is. But yeah, you're right. It's shit. So maybe Overwatch is just a game that nobody really wants to watch, which is a possibility as well.
That was my next question. That like we recently had an interview with the CEO of Vitality, who said like we're not interested in Overwatch because it's not a great viewing experience. Of course, meanwhile talking to, I think FTG said that they were in talks with Vitality. So take that with a grain of salt, but do you think there's something there?
Yeah, I think that guy's full of shit. Obviously, based on what I've heard, it seems like he's full of shit, but I agree with his point. I mean, Overwatch is unwatchable. There's no doubt about it, right? And I don't think the observers are helping with that. I think they cut down the observing team a lot, and it shows, the observing's pretty bad and the game's hard to watch, so yeah. I mean, why would Overwatch succeed? Yeah, Overwatch is a game that, like, I think a lot of people say this bullshit about how if Overwatch League didn't exist, things would have been so much better and the game could have grown organically and it would have become Counter-Strike, basically, is the kind of argument, right? And that's just not true. I think Overwatch is a game where very few people who play it care about the competitive side relative to other games. That's like the first issue. People who play Overwatch are overwhelmingly casual. It's a very casual game. Most of the content the developers produce is casual. They know it. Like, of course, they have that data, And then the esport itself isn't very watchable and isn't good, right? Like, the competitive aspect of the game is 5 people bashing identical comps into each other for 6 months at a time. It's like, it's not very interesting. Yeah. It's a game where it's way too fast paced, even when you're playing it to understand what the fuck is happening. So, yeah, it might be the case that all of this is just like, dressing for the idea that Overwatch isn't very watchable to begin with. It's all just a bunch of bullshit. It's like, maybe it doesn't matter if they change the casters. That's something I think about as well. I worry that without the Overwatch League, Overwatch never had a chance anyway, right? That's a possibility that we just never got to see challenged, if that makes sense. It's like, okay, maybe Overwatch was good before Overwatch League, but we had such huge personalities. We had like XQC and Seagull and the level of play was so low that anything was possible, But as something becomes, as the meta becomes more developed every time, we see the meta become more boring. And maybe if they'd given Overwatch more time instead of making the Overwatch League, it would become more boring as well, So yeah, definitely a consideration that the Overwatch is just a shit esport.
I think one of the attack vectors that your, former rival or rather colleague, I guess in some senses, Christopher keeps pounding is like that it is also on the content side. That for like what I see in terms of like the filtering process of you saying like we had a bunch of personalities, then the game professionalized. One aspect is like, yes, now less wacky things work, but also less wacky characters work. It's more like about the guy that can grind endless hours and probably not cause too much of a ruckus within a team environment, and probably doesn't have the appeal on stream. Otherwise, you might as well start streaming, right? So, is Overwatch as a scene that outside the server too boring?
It is, and that's something that I think we can probably blame the Overwatch League for to some extent. I think creating a league where the absolute best players play does not mean that the best players make the best content, especially when those players are Korean and Koreans don't give a fuck about content. The idea of streaming scrims to Koreans is a foreign concept, So, whereas for us it's normal because of COD and so on, right? It's something you can see now in top esports and Apex, as well, for example. So yeah, I definitely think that that's probably the case. That maybe Overwatch could have gotten by on like a content side in the same way that, because I don't think Apex is a particularly watchable esport, but it has a lot of viewership through these content creators who happen to be the top players. I don't know how they've organically created that situation. It's like hard to imagine that like these guys don't just cut their streams. That they're actually so crazy. They stream their comms and everything. I almost feel like the Koreans trained us in a way to not think that way, and maybe that we lost something along the way. But then again, maybe I wouldn't have succeeded in a system like that. I'm not the content-friendly guy myself. I'm the anything to win guy. Which is supported uniquely in this esport more than others, I think. So maybe I'm lucky in that way. But I think the real question isn't like what could have been, because I think that's irrelevant. At the end of the day, like the damage is done. The question is what will be, and I think, why would you expect that to change now? When, again, the marquee event of the year is the Saudi World Cup, and Koreans are going to win it every year, At the end of the day, it's like, the Koreans are still here, right? Not making content, and the incentive for them is the huge salaries provided by Saudi organizations, right? The incentive for TM in Europe is the Saudi salaries that have been provided, which is why they don't stream their scrims. The only people who are streaming scrims are us and SSG and maybe Toronto, right? People who are not getting Saudi money, people who don't really have a good shot to win at the EWC. So I don't think that culture is going to change at all. I think it's going to stay the same. And by the time it changes, it would take literally so long. Like, it would take years, I think. So, I mean, yeah, on some level, maybe there's an argument for that. Like in enough time periods, the Koreans lose their advantage, but at the end of the day, if the money's going to Koreans, the next rookies are also going to be Koreans. Does that make sense? Like if the money is going to Korean teams, the Korean teams are going to have the talents coming up from the lower regions and lower circuits and stuff. So I don't think it'll change. Realistically, I think we're kind of locked into this sort of culture, unfortunately. Even though, I did my best, obviously, with streaming scrims and stuff. I don't think we made like a real difference. And I think that will stop next stage as well.
Did you consider switching to another esports, and do you regret to a degree having left Valorant at this point?
No, not really. I think Valorant has a lot of the same problems as Overwatch for coaches. I think Overwatch is a unique situation for coaches where you can have a huge impact on a team and be like really prominent, like really important to winning. I think in Valorant, coaches is less impactful and less important. More or less, I think it's more of like a dad coach type game. I really don't think I saw much of a future in Valorant, especially because I worked in NA, where most of the teams were just like a bunch of people who knew each other from CS. I think people from Overwatch in Valorant were largely looked down upon anyway. It's not like I had job offers after I left Valorant, despite Immortals being like a great team for its resources, So I don't regret that at all, especially how things went. In Overwatch, they went really well, you know. In terms of like another esport, the only game I'm looking at is Project Loki. To be honest, I really think that game is something special. Like, I really want to play that game. Too bad I'm too far from any of the beta testing servers to play it, but I'll keep an eye on that one. But other than that, not really. No, I mean, esports is also a really shitty place right now, so it feels hard to justify looking for another esport. You know, if I can't make money in Overwatch, then like when I easily have a qualification path to like every event. I have an org. You know, if I can't make money in Overwatch, then why would I make money somewhere else? You know, with nothing.
Sure. Now, I guess as a final question, how good do you think your boys will do? Going forward, they kind of look like the strongest team in EMEA, if not is SSG. So that's presumably going to be one of the pivotal matches in that scene. And then you're going to Dallas, and there they'll meet international competition. So overall, you kind of gave that estimation. But like, let's say in EMEA, like, where do you think you guys are?
I think in EMEA, on paper, we're probably third in terms of roster quality. You know, I think SSG integrating Psycho has been a really big thing for them. That was a huge gap that we had. Kevster over Backbone. I think that's now gone, and as a roster, they're kind of a bit stronger. And I think TM is going to continue spending until they win. You know, TM is spending like 4 times as much as ENCE. They're going to spend money until they have a better roster. And there are plenty of Koreans who want a job, right? They're getting Keln and Vigilante, who I don't think are very good, but yeah, remains to be seen how they'll compete in Europe, obviously. But they could easily get players better than those players, to be honest, if they wanted to, you know. So, yeah, I think third is realistic, to be honest.
Sure. And what do you think about Dallas?
Well, Dallas has what, 2 Korean teams, 3 NA, 3 Europe, right? That's basically the distribution. Right. I think finishing behind the European teams, TM and SSG, I mean, maybe 7th. I think probably beat the 3rd place NA team. I think that would be the expected placement. Anything above that would be like an overperformance. Anything below that would be really sad. Like not making Dallas or 8th, that would be disappointing, I think, from the team. I won't be there, obviously, but yeah, the guys should definitely beat the 3rd place NA team at least, I think. But I think long-term beating like M80 and Toronto, probably unlikely, right? I mean, they're just spending more money. Yeah. Again, like Happy and Pelican, really great players for Europe NA, right? Like incredible, you know. Really good roster over there, especially now that they're off paying. Like we scrimmed them actually, we lost already. It was close to be honest, but yeah, they just got to NA, you know. So yeah, I think even M80 will be like a really strong team given time to work out their bullshit. Plus like a better meta, you know. Plus like hero bans, obviously EWC is a big one as well, so that might be an issue long term. But
how have you conceptualized your exit now? Are you just going like after these matches, just going to say goodbye and then never watch Overwatch esports again? Are you still going to engage? Are you still, doing your showings on Uncoachable? These types of things. How are you going to phase out of Overwatch, I suppose?
No plan for that, really. I mean, you know, a lot of the stuff I do now is because I'm awake at the time where it's appropriate to be awake for those things, you know. If I'm awake at normal hours, I probably won't be awake for any of those things, right? Realistically. Yeah, I'll probably watch pivotal matches and grand finals and stuff when I can if I'm like, you know, if it's some player that I coached before, which is pretty likely, honestly. I've coached a lot of players, so maybe I'll turn up for that. But yeah, I have no plan for the exit. You know, I think I'm just not that invested, to be honest. I don't know. It's not a very enjoyable esport for coaches to watch either, to be honest. I really find myself watching. Like the most excited I get watching Overwatch is for like the stories that I've participated in. Like watching Timeless not qualify. Even though I feel really bad for them, you know? Like that was enjoyable, not because I enjoyed the Overwatch. It was enjoyable because like watching Timeless lose, it's a huge upset, you know? I almost never watch Overwatch for the game itself, so I think that's kind of sad to think about. But yeah, really, I don't think I'll be watching too much Overwatch.
Sweet. I guess Come on, let's throw this maybe slightly cheesy question in at the end. But in a year, do you think you will be completely satisfied with that decision? Will you look back? Will you have possibly some regrets? Will you be missing some aspects of competitive Overwatch or your life? Since I mean, you've been coaching since season 1 at least of the Overwatch League. You coached the first match of the regular season, so it's been a long part of your life. How do you think you will think about this in a year?
Overwatch has been my whole life since the beta launch, like the closed beta. Like it's been close to 8 years actually. It's been a really long time. I think in a year I'm going to regret not having quit earlier. If that makes sense, you know. I think even I could have quit 6 months ago. Like the moment Overwatch League ended and they said there won't be an Overwatch League, I could have quit that day, and I think I would have been happier doing that. I'd have more money, that's for sure, you know. But yeah, I don't know. I really think my reasoning is good, and like I've really thought it out, and like I've really gone through all the math and like looked at everything and thought about every variable. Like, how's the game gonna do? Do I trust Blizzard to run an esport? Do I trust Faceit? Do I think Faceit's gonna stick around based on how things are going for them so far? You know, do I think there's gonna be orgs invested into this game? You know, I've thought about like the game balance, like my access to teams that can win. You know, do I really want to travel to Dallas, which is like a 30-hour flight for peanuts? You know, I really thought about everything, and like, I really think I already regret not quitting 6 months ago. That's how I feel. Like, I said this in my tweet. You know, I think I said that my expectations were low, and I think this year has, the results have been even worse, and I think that's true. Like, I really think this esport is dead, and I don't want to say that just because I'm quitting. It feels bad to like doom on a game that I've already retired from, but like, I really have no belief or faith in what's going on. And I think Gator said that. He said that other people are going to do this too, and I think that's true. You know, I think most people who are Westerners who don't have a money printing machine in their bedroom, they're going to probably quit because there's nothing for us here. You know, like the highest paid Westerners in Overwatch get about 50K salary a year. That's like an entry level job at this point in the economy. You know, like you can't pay housing with that kind of job. So, yeah, I really regret not quitting earlier. I think is the main thing, to be honest.
Sweet. So, thanks for the interview. If that was indeed going to be the last one, as an
might be, yeah,
as an esports professional, you never know. Like once again, you came back. Maybe the equation changes, even though very low probability. I guess from the community, thanks for what you've given to the game. I think a lot of the last 2 years were rather enjoyable, especially the MAME story was like this underdog that, had very few resources, but made a lot out of it. The little bit of the bad guy elements, like being very candid about it, cutting players ruthlessly, so to speak.
I never stopped that, did I? Yeah.
But continuously improving, and then, I mean, winning the last final Overwatch League certainly is a story that probably overperformed what this esports in an average sense would deliver. So I guess thanks for that, and best of luck in whatever you do after this.
Yeah, thank you. It means a lot. Thank you for doing interviews for the past several years.
Thanks.